1956. A kitchen in suburban New Jersey. Just before 6 in the morning. The house is quiet, but she is already awake. A woman stands over a white porcelain sink, a heavy cotton dish towel in her hands. The cold morning light catches the blinding shine of a chrome toaster. The sharp click of the gas stove knob breaks the silence, followed by the deep, rich smell of coffee bubbling in a glass percolator. Everything in this room looks like a perfect magazine spread. But the strange part is this: that perfection was not natural. It was a performance. To keep this kitchen looking effortless, she had to follow unspoken rigid rules that felt more like military discipline than domestic life. Today, modern women would refuse to do even one of them. Yet for her, it was simply what had to be done. These are 25 weird kitchen rules 1950s housewives were forced to follow. Now, before we dive in, tap that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what is coming next. When we look back at the 1950s, we often see the perfect dresses and the smiling wives presenting dinner. But behind those closed kitchen doors, women were managing their homes with a set of unspoken rules that would exhaust anyone today. These routines did not disappear because they were ineffective. They vanished because modern convenience slowly replaced household intelligence, and we simply forgot how to maintain those strict standards. The deeper you look into these 25 rules, the less old-fashioned they seem. You will start to realize that what disappeared was not just the chore itself, but the quiet pride around it. And while the final rule on our list reveals the most important truth of all, the countdown begins with an exhausting habit that started the moment a woman looked at her appliances. Number 25. The chrome must blind you. It was not enough for appliances to work. They had to shine. Every morning, the chrome toaster, the percolator, and the oven handles were scrubbed and buffed in tight circular motions. The faint smell of mild ammonia or baking soda lingered in the air. Today, modern kitchens hide smudges with brushed or matte stainless steel. But in the 1950s, a blindingly bright chrome appliance was a daily badge of discipline, wiped clean before the family even came down for breakfast. Number 24. Never cook without the good apron. A woman did not just wear an apron to protect her clothes. She wore it as a uniform of dignity. But there was a strict division. There was the heavy, stained apron for peeling potatoes and scrubbing pots, and then there was the good apron. Often trimmed with delicate lace or small floral prints and tied perfectly at the waist, it was slipped on right before guests arrived or before her husband walked through the door. It was not just a piece of fabric. It was a boundary between the messy labor of cooking and the graceful presentation of a wife. Number 23. The secret grease jar. Next to almost every stove sat a small, unassuming tin can, quietly collecting bacon fat and leftover drippings. Inside, the grease cooled into a milky white solid. Throwing away good fat was unthinkable. A habit born out of wartime rationing, preserving grease meant saving pennies and adding a rich, smoky flavor to the next day's green beans or cornbread. It was a kind of household intelligence that modern cooking oils and throw-away culture have entirely erased. These early rules might just sound like extreme cleaning and saving. But when you look closely, you realize they were not about the chores at all. They were about creating order out of chaos. It was about taking cheap, everyday objects and turning their maintenance into a quiet art form. And that discipline extended to places no one else would ever see. Number 22. Ironing the unseen. You might expect a woman to iron her husband's collars, but the 1950s house demanded more. Women stood over heavy hissing metal irons, pressing the wrinkles out of dish towels, cleaning rags and everyday aprons. Plumes of hot steam filled the laundry room. It seems ridiculous now to iron a cloth meant for wiping spilled milk, but back then, aesthetic standards applied even to the things hidden inside drawers. Number 21. No men during prep time. The kitchen was the woman's absolute domain, usually separated from the rest of the house by a swinging wooden door. When it was prep time, husbands and children knew better than to cross that threshold. It was not just about keeping them out of the way, it was about maintaining the illusion. The kitchen was her private laboratory, where the heavy, sweaty labor happened out of sight, so she could emerge looking completely unbothered. But the next group of rules moved away from just keeping things tidy, diving deeper into the exhausting schedule that controlled every single evening. Number 20. The 6 p.m. dinner deadline. The ticking of the wall clock was the heartbeat of the 1950s kitchen. Dinner was not just a meal. It was an event that had to be steaming hot the exact moment the front door opened. A housewife had to master the delicate math of keeping the roast warm, the potatoes perfectly soft, and the gravy from breaking, all while looking like she had not rushed at all. The entire rhythm of the family revolved around the man's schedule, demanding a level of timing and precision modern delivery apps have made us forget. Number 19. Disguising the leftovers. Serving a plate that actually looked like yesterday's leftovers was an unspoken failure. A good wife was expected to stretch the grocery budget invisibly. Cold roast beef was ground down into a heavily seasoned meatloaf. Leftover vegetables were buried under a thick cream-based casserole topped with toasted breadcrumbs. Modern kitchens rely on microwaves to reheat meals exactly as they are. But in the mid-century, yesterday's food always had to wear a disguise. Number 18. The dry sink rule. After the evening dishes were washed, dried, and put away, there was one final, unbreakable rule before turning off the overhead light. The sink had to be bone dry. Women would take a clean cotton cloth and wipe down the deep white porcelain until not a single drop of water remained. Leaving a wet sink felt sloppy, almost disrespectful to the house. It was a quiet nighttime ritual that signaled the kitchen was officially closed for business. You might start to notice a pattern here. None of these rules were really about making the food taste better. They were about making the labor disappear. The post-war industry sold women on the idea of modern convenience. But in reality, the aesthetic expectations only grew higher. And to meet those expectations, even the most basic ingredients had to look like they belonged in a magazine. Number 17. Gel. Oh, as a savory centerpiece. Today, gelatin is just a cheap, sweet dessert. But in the 1950s, a savory gel-o salad was a mandatory centerpiece for any respectable gathering. Suspended inside a jiggling, brightly colored copper mold were shredded carrots, celery, or even meats. Served on a cold platter, it caught the dining room light beautifully. It was a symbol of absolute modernity, proof that a woman possessed a shiny new refrigerator and the artistic flair to serve a futuristic dish. Number 16. Matching tin canisters only. Torn paper bags of flour and sugar were strictly forbidden from sitting on the counter. The moment groceries came home, baking staples had to be transferred into a matching set of tin canisters, usually embossed with elegant raised lettering. The satisfying clank of the metal lids echoed through the kitchen every time she baked. We use cheap plastic containers now, but back then, it was about visual uniformity, transforming raw, messy ingredients into a neat, synchronized display of domestic control. But the next few rules were different. They were not just about solving kitchen problems. They were about how a woman carried herself through the world, preserving a delicate balance between public hospitality and strictly hidden boundaries. Number 15. The company China lockdown. Inside the dining room, securely displayed behind the glass doors of a heavy cabinet, sat the company china. Rimmed in gold and painted with delicate florals, these plates were strictly off-limits to the family. Eating a regular Tuesday night dinner on the good china was entirely unthinkable. It was a rule rooted in a time when social respectability and keeping up appearances for guests mattered far more than everyday personal comfort. Defrosting was a weekend event. Defrosting the refrigerator was not an automatic, invisible feature. It was a scheduled weekend event. Women would completely empty the icebox, carefully placing heavy pots of boiling water inside to melt the thick, stubborn layers of frost. Thick bath towels were thrown on the linoleum floor to catch the icy, dripping water. Appliances back then were built of heavy steel to last a lifetime, but they demanded to be cared for like members of the family. Number 13. The bread box mandate. You never ever left a loaf of bread sitting in its wrapper on the counter. It went straight into a heavy metal bread box. The hollow, metallic clang of the lid shutting was a comforting, familiar kitchen sound. This heavy box kept mice away and bread fresh without the need for endless disposable plastic bags, relying on a simple system of preservation that felt permanent. The closer we get to number 1, the less this is about objects and the more it is about identity. These were not just chores. They were quiet standards repeated daily until they became character. Number 12. Milk bottle etiquette. Before placing empty glass milk bottles on the front porch for the milkman, they had to be scrubbed spotless. The cold clinking of glass against the concrete steps in the early morning fog was a shared neighborhood sound. You simply did not return a dirty bottle. It was an unspoken rule of community respect and basic decency that required absolutely no explanation. Number 11. Breakfast must always be hot. Pouring a cold bowl of dry cereal was considered the ultimate sign of a lazy mother. Breakfast had to be hot no matter how early the hour. The heavy black cast iron skillet was always ready on the stove, sizzling loudly with bacon or frying eggs. Serving a hot meal was the absolute minimum standard of care, a non-negotiable duty before sending a husband to work and children to school. Number 10. Scrubbing linoleum on the knees. Mopping the kitchen linoleum with a modern, long-handled sponge was considered cutting corners. Real cleaning happened down on the hands and knees. Women used small padded knee cushions, applying pungent, harsh, smelling paste wax and scrubbing the floor by hand until it shined like a mirror. It is perhaps the perfect metaphor for the era back. Breaking physical labor was required to create an effortless, glamorous aesthetic. Number 9. The percolator watch. The stovetop percolator demanded absolute attention. You could not simply press a button and walk away. Women stood silently by the stove, watching the dark liquid bubble up into the small glass knob, carefully adjusting the heat so it never boiled over and turned bitter. In a morning routine full of rushing, this required a few mandatory minutes of total stillness and focus. But as we enter the final stretch of our list, the rules become heavier. The remaining habits were no longer just about maintaining a house. They were about the exhausting, often invisible discipline required to maintain the woman herself. Number 8. Hidden trash cans. A 1950s kitchen was designed to look like a showroom, not a workshop. Because of this, the trash can was strictly banished from plain sight. It was always tucked away, usually mounted on the inside of the cabinet door beneath the heavy porcelain sink. Refuse, peels, and scraps were immediately swept out of view. The rule was simple. The kitchen must only display cleanliness. Hiding the waste was just another way of maintaining the perfect, spotless illusion. Number 7. Grocery shopping. In pearls. Running to the store was not a casual chore. It was a public appearance. Women would not dare leave the house without a proper dress, a sensible pair of heels, a fresh coat of red lipstick, and sometimes even a string of pearls. Today, we might run to the supermarket in sweatpants, but back then, stepping out of the front door meant stepping onto a stage. A woman's appearance at the grocery counter was a direct reflection of her family's social standing. Number 6. The poison cabinet high up. Behind the gleaming surfaces of a mid-century home were harsh, highly toxic chemicals. Lye, heavy ammonia, and bleach in glass bottles lined the cabinets. Because modern child-proof caps did not exist, the strict rule was that all cleaning supplies had to be stored on the highest possible shelf. The pungent smell of those vintage labels carried a real sense of danger, a reminder that keeping a house perfectly sanitized was serious, sometimes hazardous work. Number 5. Silver polishing Sunday. Sunday afternoons were often reserved for a tedious, messy ritual, polishing the silver. Women would sit at the kitchen table, their fingers turning completely black from the pungent polishing cream, rubbing the tarnish off heavy heirloom forks and serving trays. It was exhausting work for items used only a few times a year, but it was not just about shiny utensils, it was about honoring an inheritance. It was a physical commitment to preserving the family's standards. Number 4. The secret meat budget. Behind the smiling housewife was a highly skilled accountant. A good wife knew how to stretch the weekly grocery budget without her husband ever noticing. She would silently substitute cheaper cuts of meat, stretch a casserole with extra flour and potatoes, and hide a small secret ledger in the kitchen drawer to save pennies for an emergency. It was household intelligence at its finest, survival and strategy masked as domestic duty. Number 3. Emptying ashtrays instantly. If you had guests, or simply a husband reading the evening paper, the heavy crystal ashtray was never allowed to stay dirty. The moment a cigarette was stubbed out, the housewife would swoop in, empty the ashes, and wipe the glass clean. It required a state of constant, invisible surveillance. It was a never-ending loop of serving and erasing the evidence of the service, all without breaking a sweat. Number 2. Freshening up before 5:30 p.m. At 5:15 p.m., a sudden shift happened. The frantic cooking stopped, and the woman rushed to the bathroom mirror. She washed the smell of chopped onions from her hands, powdered her nose, reapplied her lipstick, and dabbed a drop of perfume behind her ears. When the front door opened and her husband walked in, she had to look completely refreshed. The exhaustion of the day was her secret to keep, and now we reach the one that explains all the others. The final rule was never just about the kitchen. It was about the women who ran them. Number 1. The kitchen must look like no one cooked in it. Picture a grandmother in a quiet, warmly lit kitchen. The roast is resting in the oven. The potatoes are mashing, but the room around her is pristine. The mixing bowls are already washed and put away. The counters are wiped down. The heavy apron is neatly hung on its hook. When she finally carries the steaming plates into the dining room, she leaves behind a kitchen that looks like a ghost town. This was the ultimate mid-century rule. The meal must be a masterpiece, but there must be absolutely no evidence of the labor it took to create it. It was an impossible magic trick performed 3 times a day. She did not do it just because society told her to. It was not vanity. It was armor. It was the highest form of self-discipline, a quiet dignity that demanded she never let them see her sweat. And that illusion was held together by a generation of women who carried the weight of the perfect American dream, without ever asking for applause. When we look back at these 25 rules, it is easy to dismiss them as overly strict or old-fashioned. But these habits did not disappear because they failed. They vanished because the modern industry sold us a new dream, the promise of endless convenience. We traded heavy chrome for disposable plastic, and quiet discipline for instant results. What really disappeared was not just the perfectly dry sink, the saved grease jar, or the ironed apron. It was the patience. It was the unspoken household intelligence passed down from mother to daughter. It was the quiet strength of a generation of women who took immense pride in doing things the hard way, simply because it was the right way to care for their families somewhere. In the memory of an old American home, a kitchen light is still glowing over a white porcelain sink. A heavy cotton towel is folded perfectly over the oven handle. And without a word, the lesson begins again. Did your mother or grandmother follow any of these unspoken kitchen rules? Which one do you remember the most? Let me know in the comments below. If you appreciated this journey back in time, please like, subscribe, and click the video on your screen to explore more forgotten secrets.